Let's use science to demystify or decode our ego. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. The question begins: I need to understand ego, why it is there, and how to place it correctly. The question then elaborates. I realized I may have a huge ego. I want to understand, oopsie, let's hit this button over here. I want to understand what ego is, why it is there, why I am the way I am, and how can I understand and tame it or do something about it. Number one, I just want to applaud this individual's enthusiasm and their ability to articulate their desire in a very compelling and concise way. Well done. I really appreciate that. So let us begin with broad brushstrokes. There are many ways to tackle this problem. I'm going to tackle it from the perspective of Buddhism. Come, let us discuss the dilemma of the stupid white man. Stupid white pseudo-intellectuals will take one term, tear it from its context, apply it one way, tear it from its context again, and then misapply it to an ancient text. I don't know why we do that. We just pretend to do that, and it creates more problems than it solves. Ugh. The ancient Greeks had a word, ego, which could be translated as self. Translation is dicey and dodgy and more of an art than a science. The world's favorite cocaine addict, Dr. Sigmund Freud, had a real deep enthusiasm for Greek mythology, and he just glommed onto that word ego. He used it in his psychoanalytic theory, not as a bad guy, but as a good guy. He said there was the id, ego, and superego, and the id was our darkest and most selfish and the most short-sighted desires, and our superego was our greatest altruism, and the ego was the mediating force between the two extremes. So he meant it as a good thing, as a useful thing, as a rational thing. But lazy-minded, stupid white people confuse the idea with ego and superego, and once again really twisted the teachings and made it into this very confusing pop psychology sort of a thing. And then when Buddhism began trickling into the West, there was, they took a minor Buddhist teaching of selflessness and mixed it into the goulash of ego, and it just turned into this weird thing where you have people, Zen enthusiasts, who blame everything on the ego as if it was a sentient entity plotting and scheming to undermine them at every turn, like Flip Wilson's Geraldine claiming the devil made her do it. You have some real idiots with bad haircuts and weird clothes insisting that if someone stabs you in the eye, the only reason you would have a problem with it is because you believe in a self. Oy vey, man, the Buddha never taught that nonsense. Here's how the Buddha taught. Check this out. As you relax into your exhalation, whatever you noticed during your previous inhalation could feel less defining. That's it. That's it. So if we're going to start with Buddhism, we got to start with the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's first sermon. So how does ego rear its head as we understand it in the Four Noble Truths? Where are the Four Noble Truths? Where have I misplaced them? Here they are. Okay. The first noble truth is there are stressors. Ask biologists, they will tell you there are circumstantial stressors, earthquakes and the like. There are physical stressors, coronary arrest. There are interpersonal stressors, betrayal, rejection. There are intellectual stressors. We evolve the ability to perceive stress as a survival mechanism, not as the caprice of some real or imaginary malicious celestial entity. We are able to perceive stressors as a survival mechanism. Our distant ancestors who were born without the ability to perceive stress typically did not live long enough to reproductively pass on that trait. To put it to borrow a phrase from Kenneth Branagh in an HBO movie, dead people don't fuck. This brings us to our second noble truth. From a certain point of view, there are primal survival drives. The two most basic are pushing and pulling, dread and desire. Recognizing that something is harmful, recognizing that something is beneficial. We do not act on this because we have an ego. We act on this just because it's hardwired. It is baked into our cake. So we have at the bottom of our brain two reward systems. We have a dopamine-oriented reward system that rewards with pleasure. We have an oxytocin-oriented system that rewards with a sense of fulfillment. Let's talk about the dopamine-oriented system. It's geared towards one thing: reproduction and living long enough to reproduce, because dead people don't fuck. So, no less give birth, no less raise the young. So, got to stay alive long enough to do that. That's a genetic imperative. It's not because of a belief system. It's built into our cake. And there's so many bad meditation teachers. Yes, Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, and not in the fun and tingly way. And therefore, it should not surprise us that 90% of so-called meditation teachers are boobs. They're just dreadful. But the fact is, we have evolved to have survival impulses. What is the liberation that the Buddha offers us? Is it freedom from the presence of our survival drives, or freedom from their tyranny? I would say it is the second. The liberation the Buddha offers us transforms our survival drives from tyrants into tools. When we master mindfulness and meditation, we enhance our ability to live in the flow state. So we do not have to coldly calculate our every choice, utterance, and deeds. We can move from a place not of scattered spontaneity, but of centered spontaneity. Not driven by fear of harm or desire for pleasure, but from a place of love. The second reward system, the second system at the bottom of our brain rewards for cooperation with a sense of fulfillment. And so we have these two warring systems. Survival or cooperation. And in most cultures, those who choose cooperation over survival are considered to be heroes or heroines. The liberation the Buddha offers us is not liberation from the presence of our sense of self-preservation, but liberation from its tyranny. So if an evil monk is trying to stab other monks, the monks that are having a problem with someone trying to kill them aren't having problems with their ego. Their ego is functioning properly to keep them alive. And those who say otherwise are lazy-minded or malicious. The fourth fold of the Eightfold Path is the how-to mechanism. And basically it's the way to master this transition from being subject to the tyranny of our survival drives to being liberated from the tyranny of our survival drives is eightfold. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. So the function of our quote-unquote ego, our sense of self, which should be elongated to our sense of self-preservation, is to keep us alive long enough to procreate, because that's what our genes are all about. I'm a big old geek. This is a channel that basically spoon feeds meditation for my fellow geeks. So I'm going to assume you've seen in the 90s Men in Black. There's a wonderful scene where there's an autopsy on a very short little man. And it turns out the little man wasn't a little man, but an android or a robot. And the face of the robot opened up and there's a little teeny alien inside at the controls. That's very much the way our genes work. In a very real sense, some biologists feel that our genes behave as if they were a parasite, pulling the wheels and the levers of our choices and our impulses and our hormones and our drives to serve their own purposes. Quite frankly, genes don't care if they blow up our lives and blow up our marriage. They just want us to spread them. The dopamine-oriented reward system is happy to blow up marriages and be promiscuous because genetically it broadens and deepens the gene pool. Woohoo. It's the oxytocin-oriented reward system that says, be loyal to the people in your life, be they co-workers or neighbors or friends or lovers or children or parents, be loyal to them and serve their greatest need in the kindest, most respectful way. That's not a psychological thing. That is a physiological imperative. And so it should not surprise you that different physiological imperatives evolved at different times and different circumstances, and sometimes get in each other's way. That's just a fact of human biology. So, what is the ego? Ego is short for self, and self is short for self-preservation. There is a healthy way of having self-preservation and an unhealthy way of having self-preservation. We don't need to be like Hamlet, who said sarcastically, "Oh, how like a god is he in his indecision." We don't have to be like that. We don't have to navel gaze and ask ourselves 1,000 questions, evaluating each choice. we can lead our life in such a way as to flow from a place of love's centered spontaneity. That's what the Eightfold Path is really all about. And that is the transcendence of ego, not the presence of ego, but the tyranny of ego. So the next question is, well, then how do you do that? How do you live from a place of love, centered spontaneity? Simple. As I mentioned, Sturgeon's Law teaches that 80% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. This is also taught in both Taoism and Buddhism, that there is yang and there is yin. In Buddhist terms, Gautama was all about being flexible, loving, rational, laid-back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind, but his foolish cousin Devadatta thought it was a splendid idea to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. So from a certain point of view, these could be our tendencies of our survival mechanisms run amok, devoid of insight. And this could be the transcendence of those tendencies. Let us apply this to meditation by viewing meditation through the lens of neuroscience. Let's talk about that. Let us look at the primary driver of ego, or self-preservation, shall we? Consider, if you will, this void here. It's called the limbic system, and in its metaphoric dungeon, this bit right here, this lumpy thing, the big kids call it the amygdala, it functions as the seat of aggression and anxiety. And this is a real driver of our darker, more short-sighted, self-preservation-oriented impulses. Now check this out. There are a lot of bad teachers. Most aren't malicious. Most are just lazy-minded. But there are a lot of bad teachers who implore their students to actively concentrate and actively analyze. The only way to do that is by utilizing such structures as the medial prefrontal cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is neither good nor bad. It's a tool, and it's a really cool tool, man. If you want to organize, if you want to compare and contrast, if you want to do math and science, this is your boy. This is awesome. But ask a trainer in a gym. If you overtrain a muscle, you're going to strain the muscle and eventually injure that muscle, possibly to the point of no return, he said from tragic experience. Similarly, when we overuse our prefrontal cortex, fMRI studies, functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, demonstrate that when we overuse our prefrontal cortex, the amygdala lights up. How weird is that? Consequently, we overuse our prefrontal cortex, we get stuck in even more anxiety and aggression, which we associate with the self-preservation tendencies run amok. Think angry Homer Simpson. Now, this gets even darker if we ignore the warning signs and push even harder because we disbelieved a bunch of Instagram influencers that we're supposed to just push. and eventually our body presents the symptoms of depression. How ironic is that? That those seeking the peace and joy and wisdom of meditation wind up with its opposite, terror and rage and despair. That's horrible. I don't want that. I've lived in many monasteries, and I've seen many people who've received bad instructions never pause and stop and analyze their results and question their understanding of the teachings or the teachings themselves. Just keep chugging ahead, wondering why every year they're becoming more cranky and more miserable. We don't have to do that. We don't have to make the mistake of others. We can learn from others' mistakes. And when we don't like the results we're getting, we can ask the right questions. Here's a question. If this hunk of meat and this hunk of meat can, when abused, make us miserable, which hunks of meat can help remedy the situation? Like a curious cat whose head is now stuck in an empty bag of Doritos, how can we back our way out of the situation? Allow me to remind you that the seventh fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path is mindfulness. And every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we access our sympathetic nervous system, which is totally cool. This sympathetic nervous system is located in the middle third of our spinal cord. It is evolved to help us to perceive vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. Now, does that sound more like rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel? Or does that sound more like, insert angelic choir, being flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind? It sounds like the second, doesn't it? That's pretty cool. But like many things, there's a dark side. We are wired to perceive sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. We're also wired to perceive emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. We are not digital. We're not computers. We are analog. We perceive entire spectrums of phenomena, from the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. That can really feel overwhelming. What's the solution to that? May I suggest to you the eighth fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path meditation. What is its physiological basis? But first, gotta do a little, whoops, that was an error. Let's go back over here. And there we go. And hit in front of text. Okay. All right, so meditation is the eighth fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we're wired to access our parasympathetic nervous system vulnerably, passively, viscerally. We access it, whether we know it or not, whether we feel it or not, whether we mean to or not. We access it automatically. Our parasympathetic nervous system is ensconced within the both the lower and the upper thirds of our spinal cord. Spinal cord's the star of the show. This parasympathetic nervous system has evolved to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. So there we are, minding our own business, noticing all sorts of tantalizing and uncomfortable perceptions, emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. But this is cool. Check this out. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation, be it glorious, grotesque, interesting, or boring, can begin to feel less rigid, less permanent, less solid. Wait for it. Less defining. Think, how many times have we seen that delightful comic on the 4-panel comic on the internet of a brain speaking to a body, and the brain says, "What are you doing?" "I'm going to bed." "Now shut up." "Hey, do you remember the time in junior high when you shit your pants?" And then in the 4th panel, the person's wide awake and sleep now becomes elusive. Think about the last time you had a memory that totally embarrassed you. There was no one around, but the very thought of that memory mortified you. The very next exhalation, as you relax into the exhalation, that experience feels even just a little bit less defining. Oh, does that mean the purpose of meditation is to excise all painful, embarrassing memories of junior high? Sorry, kids, you don't get off the hook that easy. The purpose of meditation is just to help us transcend our resistance. Our resistance to perceptions, emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. It isn't liquid paper, if you're old enough to remember that. It isn't an eraser at the tip of your pencil. It doesn't make things go away, but it helps us to cope. It helps our survival drives to go from tyrant to tool. That's right, folks. It's better to use a tool than to be a tool. Now we get into the really juicy stuff. As a fringe benefit of working with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems in harmony with our inhalation and our exhalation, fMRI studies reveal that this dampens and sedates and pacifies our amygdala, and in fact causes this thing to light up like a Christmas tree. This thing that kind of looks like a baseball mitt. This thing that the big kids call the anterior cingulate gyrus. This thing that functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. So you guessed it. The greatest Dzogchen Lamas of Tibet have insisted that the highest love is spontaneous and uncontrived. Let us pretend there's two extremes in a happy medium. One extreme is to be completely contrived, to have a checklist for everything. The other extreme is to be completely scattered in our spontaneity. Consider, if you will, this gal the color of a cumulus cloud. Notice how she appears to be actively sporting in tantric union. Now contrast that with the behavior of her partner, who the color of the azure sky, who appears to be passively savoring the same tantric union. This reminds us that there is spontaneity and there is centeredness, and the two can blend deliciously together. This is the centered spontaneity that is the natural product of love, that is the natural product of mindfulness and meditation. Remember, when our choices, utterances, and deeds flow with the effortless effort of love's centered spontaneity, life becomes much more delightful. Does that mean all of a sudden we get what we want when we want it for as long as we want it? Not necessarily. But it means life works out serendipitously, effortlessly. If we are defined, and this is the irony, love, this mindfulness and meditation, the 7 and 8 folds of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, oh where has my little dog gone? So these 7 and 8 folds of the Buddha's Eightfold Path drive everything else. 50% of the Buddha's Eightfold Path pertains to the loving kindness of the intellect and the interpersonal and the physical and the circumstantial. And this is driven by mindfulness and meditation, which then in turn drives the effortless effort of joy's centered spontaneity, which is fabulous. And this brings us down to right view. No, Virginia, you don't need a PhD to become a Buddha, for in the penultimate passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha promised that full enlightenment is possible within 7 years, or 7 quarters, or 7 months, or 7 fortnights, or 7 weeks, or even 7 days. You can't get a PhD in 7 days. I know, I've tried. It didn't work. Within just 7 days, we can master the Eightfold Path, because despite the fact we don't want to notice change, we are wired to notice change. We are wired to notice change in our visual field, in our auditory field, in our sensual field, in our gustatory field, in our olfactory field. We're able to notice, whether we want to or not, we notice changes in our emotions, changes in our intentions, changes in our thoughts. Remember the words of Murphy, you see a great man, and that great man looks like he's thinking great thoughts. He's probably thinking about lunch. Do I want the strawberry pie or the chocolate souffle? Our thoughts are changing. The memories that we are reliving in this moment is different than the memory we will relive in the next moment. And the next time that memory comes up, it will be subtle. It could be subtly different. For most of us do not have eidetic memory. And don't even get me started on imagination. That is just a swirling cauldron of randomness, isn't it? Sitting in mindfulness and meditation, grooving with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. The entirety of the Buddha's Eightfold Path is practiced and mastered easily. Now, you could ask, and rightfully so, dude, all of us have a sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Why aren't we all already enlightened? Why bother sitting cross-legged and meditating? Good question. The answer is as concise as it is cryptic. Why do we need to meditate? Urkel. Our brain, or I should say the components of our central nervous system, are like a tribe of Urkels, all talking over themselves in that nasally, whiny voice. Did I do that? Did I do that? Did I do that? Yes. Yes, you did, Urkel. But here's the really cool, wild thing. when we silently and mentally and passively recite the monosyllabic, the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, our brain begins cooperating with our sympathetic nervous system. And when we silently, mentally, and passively recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, our brain cooperates with our parasympathetic nervous system. Isn't that cool? And so the great irony is you don't need a PhD to become a Buddha. You don't need austerities to become a Buddha. You don't need to complete some Tolkien quest to become a Buddha. Fly, you fools. All you need to do is practice every 12 hours or so for at least 5 minutes or so, and you can master the Buddha's path. You might not be ready to teach, but you will have mastered the Buddha's path. You might not be able to speak eloquently on the subject, for whatever good that is, but you will have mastered the path. But what does it mean to master anything? Consider, if you will, tennis shoes, won't you? As a child, you're probably smarter than me, but as a child, I was befuddled over the prospect of tying my own shoes. But after countless hours and tears and repeat instructions, finally I got so good at tying my tennis shoes that I could do so spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. And we learn to do that with so many things. We learn to master tying our shoes. We learn to master going potty. We learn to master flossing our teeth. We learn to master doing the dishes, didn't we? We can master sitting and noticing and releasing. And consequently, the remainder of the Eightfold Path as well. So let's tie things up in a big red bow. What is ego? Ego is short for self. And self is, despite all the mythology, is simply short for self-preservation, which is baked into the cake. So the question is not, are we wired for self-preservation, but is that self-preservation our tyrant or our tool? The journey of self-preservation from tyrant to tool is the path of enlightenment, which can be mastered in a week. Now, what I think is really fun is this. That first week, you can play around meditating for about 5 minutes using your smartphone timer every 12 hours or so. And if you wanted to if you wanted to persist on this path, on the second week, you could bump that up to 10 minutes. On the third week, you could bump that up to 15 minutes. On the fourth week, you could bump that up to 20 minutes. On the fifth week, you could bump that up to 25 minutes. You see where we're going here? Within 12 weeks, by the end of the 12th week, you can be comfortable sitting for 60 minutes. By the conclusion of the 15th week, you can be comfortable sitting for a 15-minute lesson and a 60-minute practice, just by gently progressing bit by bit every 12 hours or so. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Well, that's enough of that jibber-jabbering. I would love to chant and meditate with you after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme, Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. So I would very much like to play with the. I would like very much love to play with the latest iteration of Diamond Mind's Easy Meditation with you after I take a moment to serenade you with my nose. Ghastly, is it not? First things first, oh, won't you please chat with me? In our compassion may we long to free all beings from the toxic tyranny of ever. Hating, craving, and clinging, metaphorically known as our three mental poisons. That's right. The rest of humanity are not schlubs to be ignored or people to compete against. They are members of our family to be served. In our pragmatism, may our liberation of all others be fueled by our reliance on the Buddha's example, instructions, and students, described by the metaphor of the three wish-fulfilling jewels. So we're going to take all these intentions and squeeze them down to, I think, 8 syllables. Oh, would you please chant with me? Of course, that reminds me of that line from Akora and Dance With Me. Anyway, here we go. Now, in my mind's eye, I have dreadlocks. May we free all through the 3 jewels. May we free all through the 3 jewels. May we free all through the 3 jewels. This is less of a prayer and more of just simply using words to gently massage our intention. And now let us bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and release that is known by many names, including the Tibetan name Treksho, wherein we slice through the duality of dread and desire. Together. Rather than indulge or controlling tendencies with the follies of active visualization, emotion, magic, and belief. Oopsie. We could just recite these kind words in harmony with our breathing and allow our subconscious to do the heavy lifting. Let us sidestep the rigidity that confuses metaphors for statements literal, and relax into the flexibility that savors the chance explaining metaphors as similes. I invoke the mastery of love and letting go, that cannot bend a diamond like strength to a simple mind. Who may all beings enjoy such mastery? Together as a team, let us meditate as transformatively And now let us view letting go through a philosophical lens as we bring the illusion of the horizontal duality of us and them into the dance of impermanence and interdependence known as Madhyamaka's yoga of inconceivability. Together. How could visible circumstance... By the way, this is a lot to do with the first fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path of right view of reality. Here we go. How could visible circumstances or lots be as impermanent and interdependent as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this body or form? Let us unpack this. Melt. The verb melt is a metaphor of impermanence. The verb absorb is a metaphor of interdependence. Notice we're not working with the rigidity of is, but the flexibility of could be, the softness, the gentleness. Notice the irony that we are transcending self-centeredness by exploring the possibility of self-centeredness, the idea that all circumstances can melt into our body. The folly of this is explored in just a few moments. So we're going to take all these words and compress them down into just 6 syllables, which we're going to divide between our inhalation and our exhalation. And please remember that this question is rhetorical. How could sensual bodies or forms be as impermanent and interdependent as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this communicational speech? How could resounding interpersonal communication or speech be as impermanent and interdependent as if it could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this awareness or mind? How could lucid minds be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into our vast empty void? One moment, if you please. Bear with me. There we go. Okay. How could lucid minds be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into our vast empty void? Like the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although tantalizing to the eye, could be not graspable to the hand. And let's meditate. And now please brace for a quick edit. Now it's time for Energy Works path of bliss and letting go. As we breathe in, we can silently and mentally recite, relaxing into this. This is whatever comes to mind, whatever we perceive, emote, intend, reason, recall, or imagine. During our exhalation, we can intone the syllable ah. Let us bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and release. Before I forget, quick edit because that's how I roll. Looking for a Jigme image. All right, here we go. This will work. So now let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness into the conventional practice of love and release. May all clear minds of all beings now be as peaceful. Let's see this real quick here. May all clear minds of all beings now be as peacefully enlightened as the mind of a oh yes, this is what I want to edit. May all clear minds of all beings now be as peacefully enlightened as the mind of a real or imagined Buddha symbolized by a Jigme one syllable zero bija mantra. You know, it just occurred to me this might be more congruent. Please bear with me. We're going to do the old wraparoony. Let's see how that looks. Almost good. Almost good. All right. Cool. Whoops, that was exciting. Come on, coordination, don't fail me now. May all relationships, all speech of all beings now be as joyfully loving as a Real or imagined Buddha speech symbolized by a horizontal mala mantra. May whole bodies or forms of... Oh, let's fix this again real quick because such is life. May whole bodies or forms of all beings know and enjoy the beautiful Helsinki and Buddha statuary, depicting the blissful body of a real or imagined yet dominant archetype of enlightenment such as Dorje Sempa. May all circumstances or lots of all beings now have their safe good fortune or boon. As a Buddha's real or imagined paradise, pure land or vati. And now we come to this morning's final meditation, so let's make a count where we bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and release. Oops, let's do a quick delete. Now let us seal this practice by chanting love and releases wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May all minds of all beings lucid, yet void no be as peacefully enlightened as a Buddha's mind symbolized by a unsearable vision. May all speech of all beings resounding in void no be as joyfully loving as a Buddha's speech symbolized by mantra. May all forms of all beings sensual yet void no be as beautifully healthy as a Yidam archetype depicted in Buddhist statuary. May all lots of all beings appearing in void no be as safely fortunate as a pure land of love represented in Buddhist paintings. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately, whoops, that's an error. Let's do some quick math. Okay, in approximately 10.5 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.